Today's reading comes from Matthew chapter 17. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While Peter was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Have you ever had an experience you wished you could just hang on to forever? Maybe a party, maybe saying goodbye to a loved one, maybe standing at the top of a mountain and taking in the view, maybe just a conversation with someone that clicked. I used to think Peter was just kind of annoying, but the older I get, the more I realize I empathize with Peter. I find myself trying to hang on to sweet or incredible moments that I experience, wishing I could freeze them in time. And I also empathize with Peter in the verses just before this moment, too. He declared that Jesus was the Messiah, but also was protective enough of his beloved friend and rabbi that he didn't want him to die. This story happens just after Peter has tried to protect Jesus, has been rebuked by Jesus, and has even been called Satan by Jesus. All of that before being invited on this journey up the mountain 6 days later. So here we find Peter in the midst of trying to figure it all out. He wanted to get the answer right, but he didn't know what the question was. Peter had cast his nets aside to follow Jesus, had been the one to correctly identify Jesus as the Messiah, even before this moment on the mountain, but also would end up denying Jesus 3 times just before his crucifixion. Peter was the one who would later go toe-to-toe with Paul about whether followers of Jesus needed to be Jewish first in order to follow Christ. Peter thought, wow, this is amazing up here on the mountaintop. Here we are. I never want to leave. Why wouldn't you want to stay in all this beauty forever? We've arrived here, Jesus. This is beautiful. Let's just stay here. It was comfortable there, away from the cares of the world and the people who needed the attention of Jesus and the disciples. There were no demons up here, no hemorrhages, no blind people needing to be cured, no scribes or Pharisees, and most importantly, no Romans. It was a time of rest and retreat, a time to recharge and become educated, a time to process new ideas and integrate the new dynamics that Jesus' ministry was introducing into the world. Especially for Peter, who wasn't really sure about associating with Gentiles, this time away with Jesus helped prepare him to be the rock of this new community Jesus was building. But this was also meant to be a time to prepare for what was to come. This mountaintop was never meant to be a permanent residence. Mountaintops aren't permanent places to stay, but we do need them. We need mountaintops because the slog through the valley is so hard. We need mountaintops because the path forward can seem never ending. The beauty of the mountaintop is something we need, but it's not something we can hang on to. It's not something we can hoard for ourselves. It's not a special experience just for the few. We need mountaintop experiences, but we don't stay on the mountaintop. What we see in this gospel is not just that the disciples witnessed Jesus' transfiguration, but that the disciples themselves are transfigured by their experience on that peak. First, they respond like any of us would. They get down on the ground, huddled in very understandable fear. And then, in the midst of their fear at seeing such an incredible vision, Jesus meets them where they are, touches them, and invites them to set aside their fear and get up again, raised into a life of ministry together. Because of their experience, they now understand how important Jesus' life and ministry is and will be, and that they will also step into a new role. Jesus isn't just some ordinary guy. This is the point in Matthew when Jesus' identity is revealed to the disciples. During Jesus' baptism, God's proclamation was private, just to Jesus alone. Now, Peter, James, and John have heard God call Jesus beloved. They've received that command to listen to him. That changes the trajectory of their lives and ministry and gives them a renewed sense of purpose. It's even more important given what we know that they're about to experience. But remember, not even they understand what's in store. Jesus knew that they would have to come back down from the mountain, even though it was important to spend some time at the top, taking in the larger view. The reality of life and their ministry was way too important to steal away to the mountaintop and stay there forever. Jesus knew that wasn't the point. The point of his ministry was not to sequester himself away from the cares of the world. The point was to be in the world, to experience the world, to be fully human. If they'd never come back down, Jesus wouldn't have healed the boy suffering from seizures, the boy the disciples couldn't heal themselves. He wouldn't have restored sight to the blind men outside of Jericho. He wouldn't have continued confounding and annoying certain people and changing lives at the same time with his parables and teachings. He wouldn't have chased the money changers out of the temple. He wouldn't have ridden into Jerusalem on a donkey and, in Matthew, also a colt, with palms waving around him. He wouldn't have given his life. Only those 3 disciples would have known who Jesus really was, and they would have spent the rest of their days in divine navel-gazing. The experience on the mountaintop was meant to change these 3 disciples, to help them to realize that their mission was greater than they could possibly imagine. Like Moses before them, they were on the mountain, standing in the presence of God's glory. They had been set free. They had been given the freedom to stop worrying about the picky pieces of the law that squeezed them, the little things that they felt they had to do to obey the letter of the law. And they had been given the freedom to look to the heart of the law that says that above all else, love one another as God has loved you. When you've been set free, when you've experienced liberation, you use your freedom to liberate others. Life isn't just about finding your mountaintop and hanging out there forever, staying comfortable and away from anything and everything that might hurt you. But we can use those mountaintop experiences to strengthen us for the journey ahead and to bring others along with us too. Our walk with Jesus is a journey. Today, we are on the mountaintop together with Jesus, witnessing both divinity and human compassion. And on this Wednesday, we will descend into the valley together in the contemplation of Lent and the anticipation of Jesus' death and resurrection. But today, we have seen the glory of the mountaintop, and we have been strengthened for the journey. And by God's grace, we will make it together. Amen.